going to say, it's never talked to me like that before. I mean, it's like, what did I do? We're glad to be here again. Heather and I always are. And I did bring Heather on a stick.
Yes.
Just to show. She's still. But, you know, in case somebody asks. Nobody asked this time, because now you've had Heather a couple of times, and you're like me. Who wants Heather on a stick when you... The real thing, yeah. We just came back from... you have to excuse me. So, lozenge in my mouth. We just came back from vacation. And kind of it was one of those bucket list vacations where you're trying to get some things out there that you've always wanted to do. More my bucket list than hers. But and we did a transatlantic vacation where for a week we were on the water. A week. We were just in the middle of the ocean. And, you know, we had our little routine in the morning. We would get up and go to the little gym thing and do our yoga with JB from South Africa. And then we would go and do our walks. And every time we would do our walks, we'd look out the water, and Heather said, wow, we are in the middle of nowhere. And I go, wow, we're in the middle of everything. Middle of the ocean, everything happens there. Everything comes from there. And so we would have our walks, and then we would go have breakfast, and then we would have our little reading time, our little devotional time together. And then whatever position we were like toddlers, we'd fall asleep. I mean, that's what people do. Wherever, you know, you just plop wherever you are. And then you get up and you think, I think I'm going to go to the room and have a nap. You're already been napping. So it was great. It was great. And we were plotting, even though we had these great stops along the way after that week, with excursions and stuff like that. But we were like sad as that week was coming to a close to go back to land. People said, didn't you miss land? We were like, no. And we didn't buy the technology thing, you know, that you could be online. We were out of pocket. We were off the grid. We were away from it all and didn't miss that. That was great. And we were sad. And we were like plotting how we might, like gym rats, how we might become ship rats and just like always be on the water, you know. Because we right now find ourselves even more so, at least for me in my life, in my lifetime, more than I've ever been before, that as soon as our foot hit terra firma, it was like, now what? You know, because the news would come across, or, you know, or that country, the guide would just be telling you about the difficulties there and the suffering there, you know, and you go, okay, now what? And then you go, okay, what now? What? I think that's very human experience. And I think Scripture attests to that desire to be removed, to be disconnected, to be off the grid. We want to be away from a world of, especially now, constant chaos and conscienceless conflict and chronic cynicism. We want peace. In all caps, we want peace. And sometimes, I don't know if you're like me and how Heather and I were on that ship, we sometimes view being at peace like a permanent dream vacation. You know what I mean? Somebody else makes your bed and feeds you. You nap everywhere you want to nap. You don't have to listen to the news. You don't have any family woes. You're just out in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of everything. Away from it all, away from the world. But you know what? Jesus was already telling his disciples then and telling us that's not our true calling. Rats. Really? There was a story from James Finley, a theologian, who had the opportunity as an 18-year-old to go away from some spiritual direction many years ago to a monastery where Thomas Merton was, the famous Thomas Merton. He said he was about 18 years old at the time. And he went to Thomas Merton for some spiritual direction because he was complaining about something. He said he couldn't even remember now what it was he was complaining about. But he went there to, zen, get centered and grounded and, walk in peace. Namaste. Just, to be peaceful, walk in peace. And yet stuff was happening even in this ministry that was like getting on his last nerve. And people were cramping his peace. And so he went to Merton, and Merton listened. He said, Jim, we didn't come to this monastery to breathe the rarefied air beyond the suffering of this world. No. We came here to experience the suffering of the world in our hearts. That's why we're here. And that's why we will go forth. Not really what he wanted to hear. And after all the disciples, what they had been through, that was not what they wanted to hear from Jesus. Continuing to prepare them, to assure them, to reassure them, and encourage them about their true calling. And it wasn't being lifted up in the happy hereafter and leaving this in chaos and not having to deal with it. This ball of confusion we call the earth. He was calling them to the Pax Christi, the peace of Christ. That was not to seek to flee the reality of human suffering and physical death, but to be present to the suffering of not only humankind, but the non-human, the very earth itself, the suffering of creation. And to be in the midst of that, to be grounded in peace, to be peacemakers. But I was thinking about even on this cruise, especially when we got back, when we were really in the thick of it in Amsterdam, where it's like, I don't know, they tell you to watch out for the bicyclists, and I thought they were like in a bicycle lane. Their rush hour is bicycles. It is not that. Those bicycles are all over the place. And motorcycles and mopeds, there's any number of ways. It was just thrown into a chaotic, anything but peaceful environment. And I was thinking, how do we have a peaceful presence in this? How do we have a peaceful presence back home in Florida every time we turn on the news? And how do we make peace in the midst of this? I'm looking to go back to the ship. Perhaps an understanding of what peace meant to Jesus. In other words, the original kind of Hebrew understanding of shalom, of peace. And it was the wonderful Rabbi Evier's Ravsitsky, I always stumble over his last name, who lifted up that the root of the word shalom, of peace, as Jesus would understand, denotes wholeness, completeness. Isn't that interesting? It was to me. I never really thought about that before. And to the early teachers that Jesus would have had, peace was not only the absence of conflict and war. And we even had, I think that was addressed as we were singing our songs, that it's not just that, about war, which we're thinking about particularly today. And the absence of that, being at peace. But about internal peace, being at peace within ourselves. But the teachings that Jesus would have received as a young man is that peace is also a moral value. I'd never thought of it that way before. And it's a cosmic principle. It's a divine attribute of God, of Jesus, the Prince of Peace. So this is what Jesus was speaking about when he was saying, I give you my peace. It's not the peace of the world. It's not a cruise. Another piece of chocolate cake. Or that everybody would just go away and leave you alone. It's something different that is both a value and a thing to be withheld within us, but also something that we're supposed to bring to the world. That our calling is to be people of peace, and our calling is to go in peace. It is a blessing. It is a manifestation of the divine attribute of peace in our own lives. You see, we seek peace because we know peace. Peace was given to us. He said, I'm leaving peace with you. It's not a foreign concept. It's there. That's why when we have those moments, do you know what I'm talking about? And typically they're in a moment of chaos or grief or trauma. And you're centered, you're grounded, you're at peace. The stuff around you isn't fixed, but you're okay. Do you know what I mean? Any of you experience that? And the reason you recognize it is because it's already within you. The Holy Spirit resides within you, and that is a spirit of not only truth, but the spirit of peace within you. So we recognize it in those moments. I call it those, we now interrupt this program moments. I remember the first time it happened to me, it was like everything around me. I was on the side of the road, my mother had just died, I was on 95, semis were going, wah! I had a little convertible with the top wouldn't come up, and so I had my suitcase, which didn't fit in my trunk, which is about that big in a Mustang, in the back seat, buckled in with a seatbelt, and it was flying out. And all heck in my life on so many levels was breaking loose. And then something came over me. And I was okay. And I remember like grabbing the steering wheel going, is this peace? Is this what this is? So Jesus was telling them, it passes all understanding. We hear that. That it's not the peace of the world. And yet this is the understanding that he would have heard. And that it is a value that we are given. And it ranks right up there with justice and truth. And he would have also heard from the rabbis that sometimes those different values are in conflict. Have you ever had that situation, the truth and peace? We heard in Jeremiah where it's about peace, peace, but there is no peace. A false peace. Sometimes families that keep secrets to keep the peace. Unhealthy secrets. That's a false peace. And sometimes the truth will trump, or peace, the truth will trump peace. Sometimes peace will trump the truth. Sometimes there's what Heather says in her work, there is something called a therapeutic lie. A therapeutic fib. And the early rabbis would have said that all falsehood is forbidden, but it is permissible to utter a falsehood for the purpose of making peace. That's not a false peace. That is something that comes out of compassion. Example, you think, how does that work? My little Aunt Margaret, before she died, had Alzheimer's. And she would ask for my mother, her sister. And no matter how many times people told her that, they called her Bill, had died, her disease process, she wouldn't remember it. And each little time was a trauma and a grief all over again. And so we shared with the family, they were trying to be honest, and that's right. And we were saying, here we make peace. It doesn't matter. And we said, you'll be seeing her soon again. You'll be together once again. And that's the truth. But that brought her peace. And Jesus also would have heard how the whole thing of walking in peace is that moral obligation that we have. That if we can make peace with others, as a chaplain, one of the things, and I know we have another chaplain in here, we're always assessing, are people at peace before they die? We want to make sure they're wrapped in a bow and they're at peace and all that. And we've learned that sometimes it doesn't look the way our staff thinks it should look. And we're looking for them to be at peace, not only with God, but with others and with themselves. And that is part of the obligation of the peace that we've been given, is to embrace that. And then the other obligation is, from that peace that we hold, is to pursue peace outside of us, where it is within our power to bring peace into a situation. To do so. Because Jesus would have understood God, the divine parent, as the peacemaker. Okay. Maybe some of you, your eyes are already rolling back and go, okay, this is great. How do we do peace? How do we be peace? I mean, it's hard. I always thought it was just something that, dropped over you, that divine, this is peace. But one of the things that we've discovered in people that are about peacemaking, as well as the psychological community, is that peace begins with empathy. Do you see that in your chaplain work? I hadn't really thought about it until I was wrestling with these texts, and I thought, wow, that is exactly what happens. Relationships are mended, families lay down the weapons, and many times it's that empathy that rises, that they see the other person's point of view. They feel their pain. But that starts with self-empathy. Now, some of us may resist this thing called self-empathy. It sounds self-indulgent. It sounds maybe like self-pity, right? But we know the ability to feel empathy is a sign of mental health. It's the lack of empathy is the thing that sociopaths and psychopaths lack. The inability to feel the pain of another, to see their point of view, to take a walk in their moccasins, so to speak. But sometimes the first people that we have difficulty doing that with is ourselves. I have people going through situations in their families at the dying of a loved one or their own diagnosis. Sometimes they're very young, and they'll start comparing and devaluating their struggle, their pain. Well, other people have got it much worse. But you've got what you got, man. This is a big deal. But we can't allow ourselves that. We can't have empathy for ourselves. We struggle with sometimes looking at our own challenges, or what my mother liked to call your failings, Ann. She always told me that as a little kid. I didn't even know what the word failing meant. She said, well, remember your failings. I thought I would remember them if I knew what the word meant. But I knew it wasn't good, but I had some. And some of us have grown up with feeling, particularly if we are a part of the LGBTQ community, that we are inherently flawed. No matter what we did, our failings went before us. Many times I find in hospice people that I should be able to relate to as chaplain and give them some sense of an accepting presence, can't let me in the room because of what I represent. Because many of us were also exposed to a theology of what I call the theology of the worm. We're just worms, I had a minister tell me one time. You're just a worm. I thought, well, God, now I understand God has a very high value of worms. I mean, real worms. And yet, Jesus says, even a sparrow falls, grieves Jesus, grieves God. How much more are you? And we can't have that empathy for ourselves, but that's where peace begins, is empathy for ourselves. Seeing ourselves as decidedly human, and yet that's something, our humanity, that God never apologizes for. I defy you to find it in Scripture. But we've heard it constantly, many of us, from the pulpit. That being human was somehow something dirty. And so we have to look honestly at our humanity, warts and all, and have empathy. I messed up, I've stepped in it, I've hurt some people, I've made amends where I could, but you know what? I'm human, and I have done the very best that I could, and sometimes I've done less than that. I'm human. And what happens in that? How does that lead to peace in communities? Because then I can have that empathy for you. For you. For you. For others in this human experience that's hard. That's challenging. And we're not so judgy. And we can walk and have peace with others because we know we're at peace with ourselves and our humanity. We can be some of those that bring into our institutions and our systems that sense of peace. Because we're all human. And Jesus, as he was telling his beloved disciples and us, this is the truth, y'all. This is what is within you. I give it to you. I don't leave you bereft. I give you that peace. But I adore you. I know your warts and all. I know your hidden stuff you don't even know. And I look at you with delight. For many of us, as we head into June and Pride Month, even more so, we need to hold on to this and give ourselves empathy and resist that which is not true. This is what Jesus was leaving with them. And so, what he was saying is, peace isn't a thing. It isn't an outcome. As the Dutch pastor A.J. Musti, and he was also an activist, said, there is no way to peace. Peace is the way. It's the journey. It's the process. It's the decidedly human, bumbling and stumbling and doing the best we can, and sometimes soaring on wings of angels, and sometimes crashing and burning, and knowing who we really are. And so I leave you with a little word. One of the places that we went was Ireland. page was it? Where I hit, part of my bucket list was to kiss the Blarney Stone. I did it, y'all. I walked in peace up those treacherous, winding, narrow little things. You know why? Because I had to encourage and be strong and love on the lady in front of me that had a lot of health issues, that was older and that was struggling. And suddenly I found out I was okay and I was strong and courageous and encouraging. Because I had empathy about how hard it was and that I was scared. I was facing a fear to do this. Heights, all that stuff, cramped spaces, falling. And yet, I went in peace and I was able to give that peace to her. Not because I'm great, but because I'm human. And I was be able to give that empathy to her and not be impatient with her. And so then we come to the top of the Blarney, where the Blarney Stone is. If you know, you have to hang off the side of the thing, you know. And first thing I did, the guy was sitting there, and I said, you know, that you give him a tip, you know, and he's supposed to hold your feet so you don't, you know, crack your melon. And again, I'm confronting my stuff, you know, but I'm embracing my humanity and the peace that was with me. And so Heather gave him his tip and all that. And I looked at him and I said, do you love your mother? You know, people are waiting and all that. Heather's like, honey? Do you love your mother? I said, because some people don't. It's not a judgy thing. I just need to ask. He went, oh, yes, I love my mother. I said, well, good. As you're holding me, think I am your mother. You wouldn't want her to have a skull fracture, and neither should you want me to have one. And so afterwards, I kissed not only the Blarney Stone, but I kissed him too. I kissed the Irishman. Now, I did have a little stretching little problem because I looked in the photograph later and I found out Heather was, I thought it was just because I was short, straining to reach it. Heather was sitting on my feet. She didn't trust that Irishman. And she was unapologetic about it. Yes, and I would do it again. So I leave you the words of the Celtic spiritual guide, Bridget. And we'll like this because some of us might have this weekend a little brewski maybe. But this is what she said. I should be like a lake of finest ale for the King of Kings. I should be like a table of the choicest food for the family of heaven. Let the ale be made from the fruits of the earth, and the food be forgiving love. And I should welcome the poor to my feast, for they are God's children. And I should welcome the sick to my feast, for they are God's joy. Let the poor sit with Jesus at the highest place, and the sick dance with the angels. God bless the poor. God bless the sick. And bless our human race. God bless our food. God bless our drink. All homes, oh God, embrace. God bless them out there with peace. And God bless us all this day with peace. And peacemakers we shall be. Maybe so. Amen.
Amen.